as we go live, it's gonna hit it should hit the objectively aesthetic.
Okay, yeah, I'll share it.
And then I'm a
Yeah, I can see it.
oh shit, okay, cool,
We
cool.
live, yeah.
Yeah, I want to share it. I'm gonna share it first. All right, so yeah, man. Welcome back to another objectively aggressive podcast with a K, and we're with Dr. Ham, and we're gonna do what we do. And with the Lighthouse series, it's either a guide or a warning. Take it how you take it. It's all about perspective. No pressure, just perspective.
Yeah.
And so, what we're gonna do here, real quick, is I'm going to share this. You sharing this?
Yeah, I'm sharing.
All right. So if you share it, it should pop up on my stuff. All right. So with all that being said, I want to talk about decision making today. And so decision making being based on fear or love. And so, last week we were talking about the evolution of religious thought. And we were talking about why and how we get to that particular point. And I still want to touch on that same thought. We still touch on that, but I want to use it in the same mind frame of why people make the decisions that they make emotionally and rationally.
Yeah.
Like when it comes down to life or death, or what's the rationalization of what we're doing?
Yeah.
Because the rationalization points to some sort of logic, and where's that logic coming from? Therefore, driving people's emotional decisions to make it feel like it's life or death.
Yeah.
Right? Because we don't live in the jungle.
That's
Concrete
yeah.
jungle. Concrete jungle.
Yeah.
Right? Concrete jungle. But I mean, for what it's worth, we live such a mundane life. Some people live such a boring life. Dare I say, there's been some like NyQuil and chicken bullshit, which could be complete fake news propaganda. But like people live such a boring life that they got to do dumb shit, in my opinion, to like bring some sort of excitement to their life. And so I guess my sweet serenade is, how do we live in a world where your life is not threatened, but there's so much emotional response to the decision making, like even online, like people react so emotionally. Like I don't see these emotions when I'm walking around like day to day with people, but behind those doors, all this pent up emotion that people want to show, but only show at times where nobody's gonna say something to them unless their back's against the wall. I don't know. So what's the rationale to the emotion?
Well, you get it. You get into some brain processing, some chemical reactions, because we run into this idea of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And for most people, what and what you'll learn from the military is that we don't really want you to think. We want you to react.
Boom.
We want you to react, but we want you to react the way we trained you to react.
Muscle memory.
Yeah. We don't want you going off the ledge, because we know that if you start thinking for your own, you're going to make decisions that may not be in the group's interest. They may be in your personal interest, but we all will be affected by your decisions. So we want the leader to think for us and then tell us to execute. Hey, execute. You are an executor. So I think that so often in our lives, we're not placed in positions to lead others. And when we lead ourselves only, we're only executing based off what we think is best, and not the overarching, objective or mission, to put it like kind of bluntly.
Well, so I heard leader here, right? So the leader is important.
Yes. Oh, 100%.
So
the thought leader.
the thought leader, right?
Yes.
That's the most important thing, and that's why leadership is so important, because that helps make decision making a thing. Like you're wherever you are, there's a leader, somebody's guiding the thought of where you exist, the consciousness of what you exist.
Yes.
So why is that leader important to you?
Well, because you'll find that most people, we can always point out a bad leader, but we have a hard time pointing out who's a bad follower. And you would say, wait, maybe he would be a better leader if I follow better. And I think that the idea of leadership comes from mission objective, because if I don't know what my mission is, then I don't know if I'm leading effectively or not, because I can be managing or I can be leading. But in often cases, we'll find that leaders are more concerned with people. And when we find out the people, it takes time to invest in individuals to find out, hey, you know what? This type of individual right here, Calvin, he don't like to be micromanaged. All right.
Ooh.
He just wants to, hey, give him the task, centralize the execution, or centralize the command, but decentralize execution. So give him the task, tell him the condition and the standard you want it done in, and then let him go. But that's you. But I can't give that to somebody else who needs to be micromanaged. So I'm individualizing a leadership strategy, but I have to feed a lot of mouths at one time. And that's why leadership is so difficult, because it's easier to give you all a buffet than make you order what you want.
Well, that's important that you say that, because like when it comes to decision making inside of the consciousness of being a service member, there are a couple of things that make sense, but there are a couple of things. There are a lot of things that don't make sense.
That could be its own show right there.
But the craziest thing about it is when you go back to like basic and you think about some of the rules and things that you heard, you're like, what? Then like that's a rule because someone did it.
Yeah.
Someone did it. And so now when you have such a large group of people, you actually have to get into this. We might just need to have some lies of omission.
Yeah.
And it'll be easier for us to just go ahead and cut this off right now. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, you shouldn't have sex when you're drinking. Matter of fact, that's not allowed.
Yeah.
Which is actually not true, right? But it's so easier to just tell people you cannot drink and have sex in the military than to tell them you have to act like the highest level of altruistic adult with people in their bodies and sexuality. Instead of teaching people that, it's like, no, we want you to go to war and don't drink and have sex.
Well, as a leader, you're going. A lot of people think that as a leader, you are measured by the success of the people who are following you. Right. So their success is my success. If they're failing, then the default position is I'm a bad leader. And we remove the liability from the individual and we put it onto the leader, as in to say that you're going to make me now use manipulation. You're going to make me use now. I'm going to make up things so that that are my best interest, so that I succeed, thereby you succeeding. And the further I can restrict your actions, the less liability is coming back to me. And I think that's a challenge, because you don't have a situation where you're letting people say, hey, know your limits, drink moderation. You're giving them guidelines. So if you do mess up, it ain't my fault. I gave you what the standard was. It's your fault. So I think that's a problem with a lot of leaders don't want to take the responsibility of empowering people to do the right thing. They would rather command them to not do anything. So I think that's part of the challenge.
Well, interesting enough, you said something about leadership, and I heard a statement by a chaplain. It's a decorated chaplain, educated, very educated brother. And he said, leadership is not about income, it's about outcome.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where effectiveness and efficiency come into play.
Yeah.
And so for our Sunday hit, as we get into our groove, I got a confident opinion. Right. So, a lot of people cap.
Yeah.
Like, this is a lot of people cap, but my confident opinion is, as a transformational leader, there are so many different aspects that you have to understand that.
Yeah.
I don't think most people who are in leadership are even made to be leaders. They just happened upon it now through hard work,
Yeah.
but also through privilege, to not even understand that most people at the top don't even walk in have never even walked in most people's perspective, especially in the military, enough to even understand most of the people that they command.
Yeah.
And I say that to say that if that's the case, some people have no business being leaders because they can't get outside of what I call mental model myopia, right? To be able to understand. So the confident opinion is, I don't think we're at a place, as we take our time, and we said we have to take our time as we get to this place, because we want to rush. Right now, that's covert. I'm speaking covertly to you because we talked about everybody wants to rush, but we might just be right on time.
Yeah.
I don't think we're at a time where white leaders can ever be transformational, because they can't put themselves in the perspective of people of color, regardless of how hard they can try. Like, there's always this drawback to the white solidarity.
Well, yeah, because when you say transformation, you have to make sure that what am I transforming into? Because ultimately, any situation that you don't have the ability, well, and then I think at your level, because I think that transformation, usually we think it happens at the top, but it doesn't. Transformation happens at the bottom. The bottom of the pyramid has to be transformed before the top. And usually by the time the top knows, the transformation's already taken place and they've already been left behind.
Okay.
So I think that when you start to look at leadership and the idea of transformational, I think the question then becomes is, what do I need to be? The idea is that I have to be a jack of all trades, master of none, being able to operate in many spaces. There are certain people that they can't lead because they can't be vulnerable. And to your point, I think that when you talk about white people, there's a vulnerability we don't tend to get when they're sharing with us, because I believe that in their vulnerability, it allows us to see beyond the veil. Like, for example, I've had, after George Floyd was killed, man, I had a white individual come up to me and say, "Hey, man, my shop is crazy right now, and I don't know how to talk to these black people." And I respected him for coming and being vulnerable as a white individual to say, "Hey, I don't know what to say. I'm from the suburbs. I'm a white guy. I have never experienced any of this stuff."
Right.
And so him being vulnerable to say that I don't know, and he's coming to me because I don't have all the answers, but he's coming to me because he knew that I wasn't going to judge him. I wasn't going to shame him. I wasn't going to be like, "Look, you are a blah, blah, blah. You need to lead." No, I said, "Listen, let me give you some things that can help you." I said, "Get the room. You don't have to be the one that speaks first. Hear what people want to say." But if he wasn't vulnerable, if he wasn't open to realize he had a blind spot, then he probably would have been not only ineffective, he could have been hurtful. He could have said something from his place of privilege or from his place of birthright to be able to not, when people are hurting, you don't want to be the knowledgeable one all the time. You want to listen. So I think that that's why one of the reasons that transformation is hard, because a lot of people, and if I didn't have that relationship with him, he would have never came to me and said that to me. And I think that's where it's harder, because we always have been vulnerable from day one.
Right.
Because it's, look at us. What you want from me?
We can't help but I mean, if we're not being vulnerable, we're being so closed off that you see it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
And so it gets to that point because I walk around as a person who I feel like I'm vulnerable all the time. Like I might be vulnerable too much.
Yeah.
But I always keep something in the clutch just in case somebody take my kindness for weakness.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but I walk around being vulnerable because that's the moral high ground that I have at the end of the day, because I mean, you treat it like a celebrity, actually, man. Like most celebrities, if they're walking around regularly, somebody's in their business, right? And so my decision making, keeping theme, right? My decision making, I have a love of certain privacy because I know that people always want to know what they don't know. If they want to know, and it's messy, most likely, right? So when it comes to my private life, I love my privacy.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I could say that there's a fear of someone using it against me, which exists. Okay, cool. But let's just say I love my privacy even more.
Yeah.
Right. And the fear is not necessarily of somebody using it against me. The fear is like, I'm going to have to hurt that person's feelings because I was vulnerable and they used it against me. Right.
Yeah. But then you're talking about emotional intelligence, because I believe that if you are intelligent emotionally, what you're going to find out is that you have to be able to manage yourself first. So, it's interesting that 2/3 of people do not know what emotion they are experiencing at the time of the emotion.
Man, you just said did you just drop a statistic about people and emotion?
Yes. Yes.
Man,
Yo,
most people, you are absolutely right, Doc. And
but
I will tell you this: most people don't know. 90% of people don't know who the hell they are.
yeah, but so there is a third of people. My wife is one of them.
Okay.
Who knows what she's feeling while she's at the time it's happening. She knows what she's feeling. If I'm angry, if I'm upset, if I'm frustrated. So what I find myself doing is I am in the 2/3 that don't know.
Oh.
I don't know. Like if I'm angry, sometimes I'll have to go and sit for an hour and think about what I'm feeling. Because it's like to me, I get all these different feelings. So I don't know if I was angry or I was just happy, but I couldn't express myself because I didn't know what I was expressing at the time. So the decision that I make now, so my decision process is to wait until I know what I'm actually feeling.
Ooh.
As opposed to go off of impulse. And that's hard for
Oh.
me because as the military has trained me is to act, to do, to actions on objective. And so what I'm learning now to do is to wait, process what I'm feeling, and then respond accordingly so that I am not responding out of anger if I am upset.
Oh. Bingo. All right, so let's go back as we talk about what's the difference, right? So what's the difference between system 1 and system 2 thinking, emotional and rational thinking?
Yes.
You're pausing to go with the acronym that I say, hey, words, actions, intention, timing. Like, come on, man, this is too easy.
Yeah.
But
Wait.
we have to, because I think we get in the world now that we get so caught up in the mundane that like busting out an emotional reaction is actually more exciting.
Well, but then you have to also factor in that hit dogs holler.
Oh my God, I just said that. Like, hit dogs on holler.
Sometimes, if it does not apply to you, keep it moving. And so often you will find people interjecting themselves into things that don't require their attention. Like if you were offended, why did you stop? Why didn't you keep moving? But your offense made you want to speak. And that's where I'm learning that I'll see something that makes me want to respond to somebody. Say I'm on Facebook and see somebody's post, right?
Right.
Instead of responding to their page, I'll just make my own post talking about it to not have a conversation with them about it because I don't have time. I don't want to go back and forth because there's a problem when it comes to intelligent people because sometimes we think that our job is to make everybody else intelligent too. We do. We think that
right there.
And so Dr. Henry Clark said, look, man, he said, I only debate with my equals. Everybody else I teach. Okay. So I'm only debating with my equals. So if we're not equal, I can't debate you.
You just said two things there. All right. So when making the decision to actually engage someone in conversation, like you actually have to have emotional intelligence and situational awareness to know.
Yeah.
You need to not be arguing with a lot of people because most people are on a level. Like I'm not saying you.
And let me tell you some great advice. You are to answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be considered wise in his own conceit. Meaning, if I entertain a fool, I am making them seem wise by just having a conversation with them.
Correct.
But I will answer them foolishly. So I will go into the foolish banter to not give you any credence because so oftentimes the fool needs an audience. The foolish person, the ignorant person, there's nothing worse than ignorance allied with power, like James Baldwin said. And you see a lot of people who believe or think that they know what they're talking about. Like, for example, I talk to people who have never been overseas, right?
Yeah.
Now you can read a book about overseas.
Yeah.
You can talk to somebody who's been over there, but until you've been there,
you got to go.
You got to go. And so when I try to explain to people, my perspective sometimes is international. I don't just make decisions based on U.S. I'm thinking big picture.
Globally.
And that's a challenge when you talk to people. Like I said, there's a statistic that 50% of people die within 50 miles of where they were born.
Mm-hmm.
They never leave the neighborhood. They essentially live and die. And that's nothing wrong with that. But the problem you run into is that they don't see a perspective outside of 10 blocks.
Mental model myopia.
Yeah.
It's like I saw something about people staying in the suburbs and like how the suburbs creates mental model myopia, generationally, right? Like if a family meets in the city and they decide, oh, we're going to move to the suburbs. Okay, let's just say the mother and the father are diverse, but the kid grows up in the suburbs. They don't get that same diversity. Matter of fact, they get all this exclusiveness.
Yes.
Right. And so we want our children to have this exclusiveness, right? Like they're so special because they're special to us. But at the same time, we're creating a myopic experience with them.
Yeah.
That when they're getting these situations of people outside of their experience, they have nothing to draw on.
Yeah.
And so with your global explanation, it's something like Rick Ross said, you can't speak globally to people who think locally.
Yeah. So I think that part of the challenge, though, is that if you are a thought leader, then I am not necessarily speaking to individuals. Right. I'm speaking to structures.
Correct.
So the idea is that, small minds talk about people. Big minds talk about ideas.
Correct.
Or, ideas. And I think the great minds, we talk about plans and strategies. Correct. That are bigger. And therein is the challenge of translation. Because I think that you have to be able to translate the large to the small. And therein is, I think, a goal of education is that you can be so distant that you can't relate to people.
Well, that's academics. And so here's where OA comes in for me, right? Like I got lucky enough that I feel like I understand enough of that terminology.
Yeah.
Right. To look, I'm nobody, right? I'm nobody. And I'm sitting there having a conversation with a doctor. I'm nobody. Hey. I'm not saying I can even keep up with you, but I'm lucky enough to even be able to do this. So cool. But most people don't speak that language. But when we speak at those higher levels and we're only speaking the structures, people, individuals default to some sort of structure to say, okay, that's going to be taken care of, and don't take action, which is why groupthink is so dangerous, but it's so important to understand, because a leader, a culture pilot, a thought leader, right?
Yes.
Has to be able to, if I say a culture pilot, damn it, we're speaking the lingo then. We're speaking airmanship. A culture pilot needs to know how to maneuver, needs to know how to be dynamic in his doctrine to be able to hit the target. And for me,
and just
for me,
and
but
just
the me, as I finish, look, the target for me is the morality of the individual to help affect other individuals to affect the structure.
Yeah, and so when you remove, or when you're focused on a target, what happens in most instances is you have to be able to clearly define the objective.
That part.
And so for me, my focus has never been individuals after a certain point, because I understand that there's echelons to leadership. You got tactical, you got operational, and you're strategic. And what happens a lot of times is that the people on the ground don't need the strategic vision every second.
No.
They need to be reinforced on the day-to-day, pay my bills, get my job, take care of my kids, drop kids off at daycare, like the day-to-day issues. And I think that when it comes to leadership, that's why every person that's in leadership has an aide, has somebody who does the task for them at the tactical level so that they can be focused on the big picture. One of the problems I think we run into is we operate on so many different levels at so many different times, we can get role conflict. And that can affect our decision making, because I'm thinking about making a day-to-day decision, not realizing the implications of that decision in the big picture.
Right.
And I think that is definitely a challenge to stay on your, not necessarily tier, but to stay focused on your objective. And when I say structures, what I mean is this: I don't need to address you if your argument is wrong. I'll address the argument. I'll address your argument, not you.
We talked about that last time.
And I don't have to address you personally.
Right.
Because I will address the argument or the underpinnings of the argument, because if that's removed, now you have to find a new argument. And I don't.
Well,
but you do.
Hey, but see, most of the time I find that people won't remove themselves for the argument. They'll find themselves on this. You know how you had to do a PT test on a track?
Yep.
Right. And so people will find themselves in this circle of fallacies and biases. Right. And so what they do is pivot to the other fallacy or bias and anchoring on that. And so you have to systematically, like Android, like But people end up not being mad at the issue. They end up being mad at the person.
Yeah. And so a wise person loves correction.
Yes.
So if I'm saying something wrong and you correct me, I am not going to look at you as like, man, now hopefully that you correct me in a way that's gentle and not be like, look, you freaking idiot, you tool, you moron, you blah, 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 because ultimately now my emotions gonna get involved.
Right.
As opposed to my logic will be engaged. So I find that if somebody's in error, that what we have to do is not beat them up with knowledge and facts and data. We have to make sure that we understand that there was a time when we once had thoughts that were not a fallacy, thoughts. And so when we can deal with that internally, I think it allows us to not only be more a better leader, I think, but you're going to make better decisions, because the question you're going to ask is, I am not trying to change someone's thinking. I'm not. I'm only want them to think critically about what they think. Yeah, I don't want to change your thoughts. If you think something, think it. But if you can think more critically about it, then I believe that if you're being critical about your thoughts, then you're going to look at those biases. Then you're going to look at those issues that bring up validity. And that's a challenge for most people because they don't know who they are without their bias.
Ooh, most people don't know who they are. All right. All right, Doc. So it's time. It's time to move into the cocky explanation portion.
Okay.
Okay, so my cocky explanation, as some of you were talking about, is it's about understanding the rhetorical triangle and how it affects the emotion, right? So, like me, I'm a person that I know that I'm gonna be hitting logic a certain way. So my rhetorical triangle, logic, passion, credibility, right? So I'm always crashing hard on all forms, right? So whatever we're talking about, I'm going to establish my level of credibility in it. And if it's not by position, it's going to be heavy on the logic, and it's going to be heavy on the passion, if I even care, right? And so I'm going to lean heavy on that. And so I purposely hit people emotionally because I'm getting them to either think critically or to make a different decision or to think about making a different decision.
Yes.
So I communicate my strategic messaging is purposeful and deliberate most times.
Yes. And then so the three argumental structures is ethos, which is your character. Pathos is your passion, and logos, which is your logic. Now, in order to make a convincing argument, you need all three.
Yes.
You need to have the character. Your ethos is who you are as a part of your character. I am not a liar, so I'm gonna tell you the truth. So my pathos is my passion. But the problem that a lot of people run into, and my cocky explanation is that passion without knowledge leads us to error that cannot be corrected with logic.
Correct.
And so when you start to talk to people who are passionate about a topic, that passion can take them only so far.
Right.
Because passion will run out. Because your passion is like a fire. It will fizzle.
It will.
And at the end of the passion, you're going to need the logos to now come in and to keep the flame going at a temperature that is sustainable.
I would agree. I would agree because it goes back. Passion goes back into all the emotions in which we were talking about, the fleeting stuff like happy, sad, angry, frustrated, and that stuff fizzles. But I'm in total agreement with you. The passion needs to be tied to the logic because the more understanding you get should feed the passion of why you're even doing what you're doing.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. And so for my discipline and my leadership theory, SALT, understanding the organization, the structure, your life, whatever you're looking at, having the vision to see a problem, see an issue, or have a conversation using your rhetorical triangle. You're talking for a reason. If you're not talking for a reason, why are you talking? Okay, so if you're talking to convince, you're using a rhetorical triangle to affect somebody's emotional decision making. So with that being said, that means you need to understand where they lie morally.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Facts.
Morally. And so, as we close out, coming up on the 30-minute, we're gonna be hitting them from different angles, because you never know, the lighthouses just come different ways, right? So as we kind of leave something to talk about, I want to leave like this morality, because we were talking about religion and we're talking about decision making, but it comes down to why we do what we do based on the moral being.
And so for me my default moral is always justice. I believe that justice, equality, these are ideas, because we only know them when we don't see them.
Right.
We only know that there's something that's lacking by a contrast. And if we don't see justice, if we don't see equality, what we find ourselves doing is asking a question, is why? And that's a moral question. Why is a morality question? And maybe, you know, I tell people all the time, I said, some people think that things are broken. I say, maybe it's not broken. Maybe it's operating how it was intended to function.
Exactly.
And you just think it's broken.
Right.
It's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And the morality, the moral question is that I don't think that you're going to create an environment or a civilization without shared values, without shared morality, without shared ethical ideas. Because if not, all you're going to do is create a tribalistic nature where everybody's going to be fighting for power, or might makes right. My power, see, I have the power to enforce my moral code upon you. And you can only enforce a code if you have the authority to punish those who violate what you say. If you can't punish me, if you can't restrain me from doing what I'm going to do, then there is no censure for morality to come in, which is what religion is. Religion is that punishment. Religion comes in and says, if you don't do this, you won't get fill in blank, whatever.
Boom.
And so when you start to get into the idea of power first, because power in and of itself creates its own vacuum of morality. Because if I have power, my only question then becomes is, how do I sustain this power? Religion. How do I maintain this power? Orthodoxy. You know?
All right.
And so when you get into that idea that power becomes the metric and morality is only a derivative of power. That's all it is. It's what people are going to do. And if you start to think about morality before power, you're going to find yourself being a victim to those who are power and force the moralities on you.
Okay. You said something important there. All right. Two things. Why this is why I feel like I have a samurai code, which is of morality.
Yeah.
And then I have an assassin's code.
Yes.
Which comes from when you gotta handle business, you gotta handle business.
Yep.
And so that comes from the farmer and the warrior.
Yep.
And so, man, that's a lot that you said. And it's important to know that a lot of people's moral decision making is a derivative of the power structure and what they say is important.
Yes.
And so one of the things that's most important in our power struggle is money. And so as we get to the end of our short podcast today, we have our I'm rich bitch section, which we do a money tip. And so I'll do my money tip first. I would say there's a Uplift app that you can find the cheapest gas. And so I make sure that every single dime that I use makes more money. But if I get to a point where I'm trying to not penny pinch, but make sure every dollar goes as far as it can go, saving that money with the gas, but making sure I'm using a card that gets some certain points, like 5 times the points at the gas station, or, you know, making sure that I'm using a card at the restaurant, like saving that money and making sure that money is doubling. Because when you pay that credit card off, like monthly, because if you use it like a debit card, you should pay it off monthly. You'll get those points every time. So it's like you're doubling your money.
Yeah.
It's my money tip.
Or even going to Sam's Club, because they have better buy it in bulk, buy something. But I'll tell you, so my money tip, it comes from Grisham's law. Because we're in inflationary times. Grisham law states that bad money drives out good money in the economy. So people hoard good money when inflationary times, because bad money drives the price of it down. So, for example, if you have a quarter that was made before 1965, it was made out of 90% silver.
Right.
So when they changed the law, people started hoarding all those quarters because the silver value was worth more. There's very little you can do in inflationary times outside of protecting your assets by investments. So rich people will buy art. because we know art holds its value. But ultimately gold, silver. But one of the things that we talk about is real estate, but making sure that you hold on to assets in inflationary times and don't sell them, because as things go up, that asset now holds more value. So holding the asset as long as possible. So I collect coins.
Okay.
I'm a coin collector.
All right.
I have some coins that are valuable, but I understand that as the value of the dollar goes down, the value of those coins go up, because people will pay more of those dollars to get those coins. And so that's something that I would tell people, as far as money wise, is that certain things that you have are assets that you may not even know that they're assets. Some people, you might have a quarter, and it's like, this quarter was made in 1934, but it was one of only one or two. So making sure you're researching your change, because certain pennies are worth more money than other pennies. If your penny was made in 1982 and it has a nickel on the back, that penny is worth $4. But that's something that we don't tend to think about. Even change. That's why they removed the coin. They used to make the penny out of copper.
Right, I remember.
But then copper got expensive.
Correct.
So Grisham's law came into effect.
Hey man, those meth heads and people of unfortunate circumstances let you know how expensive copper was getting.
No, them pipes. They was getting
pipes. Protect those pipes.
So
it's crazy, because believe it or not, one of my lingering money tips was about the decision making of purchases, right? And you said it with that particular law, but as we close, good doctor, let your decision making on purchases be of investment.
Yes.
Right? Like, okay, let's just say you like to retail therapy, right? I think we all have it of a certain to a certain level, right? Like Amazon has made it a little bit too easy, but I would say this. I've made it to where we buy these little knick-knack gum things, but the things that you actually purchase, like, let them be of investment. Like, if you buy a computer, good Lord, I know you need a computer, but maybe get a MacBook, not because it's Apple, but because it'll last you longer. Because if you buy that $200 HP, you're gonna keep going through that 5 times in 4 years. I mean, who knows, right? I'm saying let your purchases be of investment. So if you ever find yourself having to sell something, it could bring return.
Oh yeah.
And it brings long-term investment at the same time. I'm sorry.
Oh, and that's the one thing that you'll see primarily amongst Black people in America, is that we have the lowest ratio of education to recreation expenses. So for every $200 that we spend on entertainment, we only spend $1 for information education to this brain. And that's the lowest. So you have to make sure that ratio that, hey, I'm gonna buy a book this week, and I'm going to invest in my brain, as opposed to going to this, theme park this weekend.
For sure. Like, I had to make education fun to me.
Yeah.
Like reading books, and it seems difficult, but those podcasts like we're doing that could get you interested in stuff like that, like different books in those fields. Like if you like, the philosophy of, I don't know, religion, I don't know, just pick up something and just start reading. And people don't have any substance, man.
That's it. You got to invest in you. You are your number one asset.
And you know what? We'll leave on that, Doc.
Boom.
Look, I'm gonna catch you. It was a busy week. I know you're busy. I saw. Hey, look, we're gonna catch up again next Sunday for another series, the Lighthouse series on objectively aggressive. That we're gonna catch up with you. Everybody, take it easy. Enjoy the week. We out.
Peace.
Peace.